Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to today's interview with Bonni London. Bonni, I'm so happy that you're here. I met Bonni, who is a fellow clinical nutrition specialist, and she's in Florida. She actually lives in Sarasota, one of my old places that I used to hang out in when I lived in Florida. And I met Bonni through Mindshare, and we got to spend a lot of time together being roommates. And I just love everything that you do, Bonni. I feel like we're so aligned as far as this true intention of helping people feel better and live better. And I see that you embody that in everything that you do. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. And today we get to talk about a big topic that's in a lot of people's minds, which is belly fat. And what is the deal with belly fat? Why is it such a concern? And why is everybody talking about it, especially when it comes to women in peri and menopause? And so we will be discussing all of that. But before we go into our topic, I would love, Bonni, for you to just share with the audience a little bit about your journey getting to be where you are today, and all of the trainings that you've done, but more than that, just sort of your how do you work with people and who do you help?
Okay. Well, that's a big question, but I just a brief background. Uh, Growing up in the 1980s, as many of you may appreciate, surrounding by all the recommendations of high carb, low fat, chronic cardio, and unbeknownst to me at the time, I was suffering with something called polycystic ovary syndrome, which, if you don't know, has a lot to do with insulin resistance, which is really important for today's topic because this has everything to do with belly fat. So, listening to those recommendations, I struggled to maintain a weight that I was comfortable within. Beside, I was doing as much as 3 hours a day of cardio, completely cuckoo. I mean, I realize now. And you don't have to, because I'm going to tell you some of the secrets today, so you don't have to struggle like I did. But this put me on a journey to investigate where I ended up, after I graduated from college in fashion, I ended up switching gears and becoming a personal trainer because I just loved exercising and I wanted to help people overcome their issues. But then pretty quickly after that, I realized it was more important to really dive into the food. And that is when I decided to get my master's in clinical nutrition from NYU, but also become a registered dietitian. Then moving along, years later, I am here now in Sarasota, Florida. I moved here with my kids. I worked in long-term healthcare, but for the past 15 years, I really have the privilege of working one-on-one with people and really helping them, navigate this new environmental food world that we have and helping them make meaningful changes so that they can, yes, I have a little demonstration here today, lose some of this, because to me, that is the name of the game. Because, listen, fat, this is way, way more than aesthetics. It really impacts every area of your entire life as far as health goes.
Yeah, so much
Okay.
so. And I love that you brought in the notion of navigating our environmental and food system world. And I know you have a book coming out soon. So tell us a little bit about that connection briefly before we launch into belly fat.
Well, sure. So yes, I finished my first book called Healthy Rebels: Live Well, Lose Weight, Defy a World That Makes Us Fat. Because what I have realized, and this is my number one recommendation when anyone comes to see me and walks in the door, setting up your environment for success. I mean, let us face this. 50 years ago, you could have been thin and healthy by accident. It is what is around us. It's the recommendations that have come down from the dietary guidelines, which you may not think impact you, but actually this is what drives the education. I actually have a lovely dietetic intern here right now sitting here, and they're still teaching them the same information from 1985.
That
And so
doesn't work.
this Right. And so this is how the information gets, goes to your doctors and all the research that's out there. I don't believe I have one person that walks in my office seeking my help that is not well-meaning as they tell me I am eating healthy, because this is what they've been told is healthy. And so this is why of course, the book has the word rebel in it, because it is hard to be like, when you're going out to eat, oh, I'm sorry, what are you cooking those vegetables in? What's on those eggs? What was that? What was that cow fed? No, I don't. I'm not
Right,
saying,
but it
I'm not
is.
saying
It
you
can
have to
be,
do that, but you get the idea.
yeah,
Like you
it feels
have,
like you're swimming upstream. Yeah,
people might look at you a little cuckoo. But
that's right.
that's what it's taken. And so I want to make sure that at least people's home environment, their spouses, that they can really set up their lives to engage in these better choices.
Yeah, and that they understand
Make it
what's sort
easy.
of safe and what's toxic and what's, neutral at the very least.
Hmm. Yes.
Right. Beautiful. Well, okay. So thank you for the history and mentioning your book. And at the end, of course, we're going to let people know how to get in touch with you, how to get your wonderful resource that you have on your website, and to find your book. But now let's dive into the belly fat. So, can you explain a little bit about why belly fat is actually considered more dangerous than other types of fat located in other parts of our body?
Yes. So belly fat is another term, but basically what it really is called is visceral fat, because it is the fat that is surrounding our organs. And we understand now that this fat is alive. When I first started this, we used to think that fat was inert, like, just a little extra luggage there. But no, it's actually an endocrine organ. And what that means is it is constantly producing these inflammatory messengers called cytokines, which has the ability to communicate to every cell in your body. And so there is a whole cascade of issues that go along with this. Now, what often precedes belly fat, which is really important, is fatty liver. And we have an epidemic right now of non-alcoholic fatty liver, predominantly because of the introduction in the late 70s of high fructose corn syrup, which has enabled it to, be ubiquitous in our entire food supply. And also, I mean, you need to consider women and men, it is dangerous for both of them, but way women are built before menopause, we need to have room in that area for what? A baby.
Baby.
Right? So it would be dangerous to have competition going on down there. So it's actually quite fantastic as nature has set it up that prior to menopause, actually what happens when we gain weight, our fat cells become um, hyperplasic, which hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. But what that means is that we get multiple fat cells, but we're increasing the subcutaneous fat, which you might not love, having bigger thighs or butt, but from a health point, this is actually advantageous for us, right? It makes sense, like I'm just explaining. And by the way, just thinking particularly about the belly fat, I do want to point out that the visceral, you can still have some subcutaneous fat, which, I mean, you can pinch. If you can pinch it and it's soft, then that is the subcutaneous fat. So if you on your own body, or you ever notice someone that it looks like a hard ball kind of that's around their abdomen, that hard, that is the visceral fat. Yes.
The danger fat.
That is the danger fat. Yes.
And unfortunately, too, I mean, some of the numbers we see nowadays with children, and because what you brought up about high fructose corn syrup, and ultimately just anything that's ultra processed. 100 years ago, children had 0% ultra processed food in their diets. Today, it can be up to 70%.
No,
And
it's
what we're seeing with the rates of obesity and even prediabetes in children is truly alarming. And so it really is important to understand this mechanism so that for all the moms out there and grandmas and people that are watching this that are trying to just understand how to improve their own bodies, to really then take this knowledge and apply it to families, you know, their children, their grandchildren, because this really is important. And if we can stop it earlier on, the earlier we can stop it, the
yeah,
better.
because you hit on a very good point. Because people they come and see me, and it's not like people are like they don't realize that they're chugging high fructose corn syrup. I mean, certainly people realize sodas, but the problem is it's in salad dressing. It's in crackers. It's in whole wheat bread. It's in all of these foods.
It's in cough syrup.
Right, it's not in foods also, very interesting, that are not inherently sweet. It can be in savory foods, but the food industry has recognized that it makes food more rewarding when we add this sweetener to it. And it's very crazy. Actually, I really had the privilege recently to interview on my podcast Dr. Rick Johnson, and I mention it because he discovered the connection between fructose and turning on this special fat switch from evolution. So when we think about it, traditionally, like when I grew up, even, and I'm not, that old, we did not have access to fruit and juice and all these things, maybe juice, but fruit for certain, not all year long. It was just in the fall and summer. And when we think about from evolution, it makes sense because these foods were there, and the fructose tells your body winter is coming, time to store fat and make you tired and all of that. I mean, think about all the hibernating animals. What are they eating? What are they eating? Pounds and pounds of berries and fruit and all of that. So it's on all of the work that he's done, I would say incredible. Makes a lot of sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And so this notion that, you know, if you have this hard belly fat, visceral fat, it's accumulating in our midsection, it's active, it's creating these inflammatory compounds, hormones. What then happens in the body, and especially for a woman in menopause, right, or premenopause? How is her body changing even her ability to deal with these hormones or with the fat directly?
Well, I think of menopause as the perfect storm in many ways. Well, people struggle for maybe a decade before with something called perimenopause. And why I say that is that you might have had issues prior to this change in hormones and estrogen, but you didn't realize it. But now it came out. So, of course, we do think about the major lowering of estrogen that's available, which served out of a protection, believe it or not, in the microbiome. So if you have some, which many people come to me who have some sort of bacterial imbalance in their gut. So if you have that, that is just going to exacerbate it. Now, segueing to how this impacts belly fat is that, guess what? And there's so much research on this now, that the bacteria in your gut has a very important role on your weight. We have two major families of bacteria called the bacteroids and the firmicutes. And there's a lot of products out there now, which you and I have discussed, that actually are going to aim at basically helping the beneficial, not just beneficial, but the bacteria that's going to support being lean and healthy. Oh, and guess what? The firmicutes, the ones that actually support belly fat, what do you think they live on? They live on carbs, man. That's one of the big things, and they are going to fight for their survival. They do fight for their survival, as they do actually communicate to your brain, believe it or not, to increase the cravings to feed them. Now,
Yes.
so this,
And not only the firmicutes, but if somebody also has a fungal imbalance or they have candida, I mean, sometimes, and I imagine, Bonnie, you've seen this in your practice where somebody says, you know, I don't know what takes over me. I go out of my way 3 miles to just get that chocolate donut or whatever it is, and it feels like I'm being possessed. And when that's happening, chances are it really is your bacteria is leading the way, right? There's this hunger that's almost impossible to stop. And it really takes a gut rebuilding and understanding what's happening to start bringing it back to balance. And it may be hard at first because there is something called the die-off effect. And so when we're starting to regulate and bring in some of the beneficial ones and some of the not so beneficial ones are dying, it might feel really awful, but it's like 3 days, you know, like maybe a little longer for some people, a little shorter for others, but that's an average. And people can really start feeling like they are free of that, like, possession. Have you noticed that?
the way I like to present this is when you are eating, you are not the only one eating.
Yes.
Because you eat, but then the bacteria goes crazy, and that's it. Now, the next topic is something I am very, very passionate about, and this has to do with the toxins that are also so prevalent in our environment. I mean, these toxins, we have the last estimate, at least 80, maybe to 100,000, all random toxins that are now prevalent in our environment that are never tested for safety. And certainly not all together. They are tested from the company by themselves. They're in charge before they come out. And there are many, many estrogen mimickers out there. Okay, so one of the big ones is BPA, which was actually going to be a hormone, a medication, before somehow they figured out, oh, this will be great to harden plastic. Are you kidding? And it's on receipt when you go to the grocery store. It's in the water bottles. So coupled with the fact that you have the lower estrogen, now you're getting bombarded with all these xenoestrogens from the environment. So even if you do have estrogen, it's going on to the same place on the cell where your estrogen is supposed to go, so it can't communicate. And yes, toxins do majorly impact belly fat. There actually are called obesogens. There is a category of toxins called obesogens, and these particular toxins have been demonstrated to alter the way your body uses calories. Are you kidding me? You're eating the same protein, you're working out at the gym, but then you got these toxins, and and then it'll direct your cell, oh, become a fat cell instead of a muscle cell. And so this is something I have been really passionate about in my practice, that I has resulted in major positive results, as much of all the other stuff. Just get rid of the toxins, and eating clean is going to help get rid of the belly fat. I promise you, among other techniques, which we can talk about when you're ready.
Definitely. No, and I feel like it can feel very depressing to even hear this because it can feel hopeless, right? All of this in the environment is beyond my control. And it's like things even in our drinking water. And not only are these toxins interfering directly with our cells, they're interfering with our gut microbiome, which, as we just spoke, then has an effect on our cells and on our digestion and on our mood.
Right.
So
I think it's a high strategy is the way I think about it. So I always recommend starting with eating organic and even beyond organic. I would also suggest, and I'm lucky here in Sarasota that we have a lovely organic farm, but a lot of farms, even though they might not have the designation organic, are still made organically. So the more you can get stuff close to home would be fantastic. And then number 2 on my list would be water. So it is an investment, but I do have like a full water filtration system, but really reasonable. You can purchase an under the sink filtration system. And believe me, you're going to save money using this versus getting the water bottles within a year. I mean, it could be, a couple $100 for the year. And so at least
Definitely.
water is clean. And then after that, I dive into like all of your skin products, because anything you put on your skin, and I'm not perfect, totally not, but the suggestion is it should be safe to eat, because the bottom line is it absorbs right into your skin.
Right.
I mean, right into your skin,
Seconds,
into your
everything
blood,
gets absorbed by our body. Yeah.
which is
And
kind of cool.
it is. And I want to mention this notion of like helplessness is that it doesn't have to be that way. There are many things we can do, like you just said, looking at skincare, getting a filter, buying organic, but that I know especially there's a discussion today around like, oh, the wellness industry is all about spending more money and it's for elite. And it's not, it doesn't have to be that way. I used to help a lot of people with lower income to actually adjust their budgets and to find things, because then they're paying the farmer, not the doctor, and nothing against doctors, but this idea that yes, you are saving it and a lot of hardship later on if you can sort of, change your budget around a little bit so that you are including, especially when you look at Dirty Dozen 2015, or like you said, the filter, instead of buying water bottles and then just carrying a reusable bottle. It can be any kind of bottle, but obviously glass is great, but can be hard to carry around. So it could be a stainless steel bottle, but something that there's so many ways that people can do and actually reduce their expenses and buy food in a way that is intentional, where you reduce waste, because in America we waste 30% of our food. I mean, that's 30% of our budget,
So,
right?
yeah, so this, I would say, this addresses what I'd say the first part of thinking about detoxing or being cleaner and eating clean. So the first part is, okay, stop taking in the toxins as much as you can. That's reasonable, and focus on the stuff you do most days, like coffee. I always tell people organic. You're drinking it every morning. Let's hone in on that. But then the second part of this discussion, which is just as important, is how once the toxins that are in there and stored in our belly fat, by the way, because we, just like animals, store our toxins in our fat. So what can we do to encourage natural detoxification in our body? And of course, this is where the whole diet, exercise, lifestyle thing comes in. So, okay.
And we need to sweat. So what are some targeted belly fat reduction tips that you can share?
Okay.
And it's complex, so say that it's not like a magic bullet, of course, but I feel like
first starting with diet, which to me is still the foundation, because diet is really where we lose fat. Exercise, which we'll talk about in a second, to me is non-negotiable, but for different reasons. But the diet is critical. So I really want people to have their diet around protein, high quality protein. I mean, okay, never mind that it does boost your metabolism, because it is so metabolically challenging for your body to digest it. But also, do you know what everyone says when they come in my door after they adhere to some of my recommendations, especially with protein? They're not hungry. They are not hungry. And let's face it, if you are hungry, this is not going to go down well, people. And this is fantastic, because the message is this. We have receptors in our body that know when you have gotten enough protein, or more importantly, the amino acids The amino acids is when protein breaks down, and that's really what we're eating protein for anyways, is to get those essential amino acids. And there's actually receptors in your gut that tell you that you have had enough protein and you are good to go, and ones that tell you you haven't had enough, to the point where I like to bring up how much we have learned in raising animals. This is very interesting. When they want cows to gain weight, they decrease the amount of protein in their feed because the cow will naturally eat more until it gets all of those amino acids. So really thinking about that, and I see it in action every day here. And the other thing about protein, which this again, I feel so much has changed in our understanding since I was a trainer in like the mid 1990s. We actually need more protein when we are sedentary. That's right. Who would have thought that?
Yes. And we burn more calories at rest with
right.
protein.
But it makes sense because see, when you are sedentary, we are not giving the signal from the muscle that's like thirsty, like, oh, give me those amino acids. So in order to stimulate, which is what we want, muscle, then we need a little bit more protein. Okay, so I think that's good on protein, but I would say, of course, the next belly fat thing in supporting the microbiome and all of the detoxification pathways would be eating a cornucopia of vegetables. And I think to me, from Nutrition 101, I think this bears repeating, is vary your intake because people can have issues with certain vegetables. There are toxins which I think are okay to eat, like natural toxins like oxalates, for example. But I think it is an important thing to think about eating a variety. I always say dark leafy greens, the cruciferous vegetables like the cabbage family, broccoli, cauliflower, which has an important role, by the way, in actually helping clear out some of those environmental estrogens. So that's
our used up hormones.
Right. That's why it's been associated with improvement in having less risk of cancer, as an example.
And the antioxidants and all the colorful foods, like
that's right. Now, next on the list, and so important, is the kind of fats that we should be eating and should not be eating. And there is a tremendous amount of confusion about this for sure. Well, first of all, so I'm not talking about how many macros right now that people should be eating. And generally what I recommend after you have met, the amount of protein I like people to eat, and getting like 1 to a couple cups of vegetables at a meal, depending if they're raw or cooked, is just adding enough fat for your food to taste delicious. I feel like that's kind of an easy way to think about this. But we understand now, of course, there are 3 kinds of fat and they're not all equal. So what our body is made up of, and by the way, when you eat too many carbohydrates, your body makes saturated fat. And our body can make monounsaturated fat too. And these are the fats we're eating mostly. So olives, avocados, olive oil, and yes, butter, yes, to bacon, okay? We don't need to be afraid anymore. Fat that is dietary fat does not become this. And actually, I would say the opposite happens. Because when we think about visceral fat, the number one issue with causing visceral fat is insulin. Insulin is the energy storage hormone. So you cannot store fat in your belly when insulin was low. And guess what fat of the 3 macronutrients, it has the least ability to break down to glucose rather, and provoke a response from insulin. So we want to think of it as belly fat friend, not foe. Although I would just put a little dot there. We want the butter on the broccoli not on the bread. Then it becomes a whole nother discussion, which is not good. Just to be crystal clear on the fat thing, okay? But before
Yeah.
we leave that, I always need to talk about the polyunsaturated fats, omega-3 and omega-6.
Yes, and vegetable oils, please.
Yes. So unfortunately, we've had a shift which has taken over our food supply in the past 150 years from naturally occurring omega-3s from wild fish, grass-fed animals, to man-made, never seen by the human body before, created in a factory, seed oils. And they function very, very differently, and we need very little of them. And this 100% contributes also to the belly fat, because these fats, and I am talking specifically about soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil, safflower oil, sunflower, anything from a seed. I say get fats if you want to from a fruit, like I mentioned, olive oil or avocado oil. But we really want to stay away from the seeds in order to think about it. In order to get the actual fat out of a seed, I mean, you're not just squeezing it like you would a avocado. Like that's much easier, right? And actually I was just in the middle of reading a book this morning. In order to get soybean oil out of a soybean, it's a 10-step process.
Same thing with canola oil, by the way. I just want to mention this. People can look up how canola oil is made. There's a video on YouTube from the canola oil industry. Sort of like a prime thing, like, here's how we do this. And it's 10 steps, it's hexane solvents, it's deodorizers. It is gross. It is not a product that should be going in the body.
Well,
period.
it wasn't food. We were using this for fuel before Procter and Gamble decided to hydrogenate it, turn it into Crisco, and sell it to housewives as actual food because it looks like lard. But this was used for lamps. This was used for lamps.
And for fattening cows too.
So why do we think this is okay? Someone's cleaning my window right now. I just thought I'd mention
There's we can't hear any noise or anything.
Oh, okay. I'm like, hope he's dressed. Okay.
Yeah, so that was lovely. I love that you went over the protein, the fats. Was there anything else you wanted to say about the top tips for the belly fat?
That is the big thing. And then, of course, we did not mention we did talk about vegetables, but along those carbohydrates, I did not talk about the starchy ones. But as we touched on earlier, of course, I think everyone knows all of the processed ones are really, well, maybe they are a fan of belly fat because they would promote it, because nothing is going to break down to glucose and drive insulin more than consuming these high glycemic, processed, refined carbohydrates. So it doesn't mean that we have to avoid them, but this is my suggestion. Number one, when you go to sit down to any meal, make sure you get what your body does need first. So the protein, the vegetables, the fat. Okay, fine. You want a little rice, peanut, whatever it is. So then you can have a little bit. And then the next suggestion is to leave it after, like towards the end of the meal a little bit, because that really can impact your glucose. And again, glucose is the name of the game when it comes to belly fat, because that is what directly provokes insulin, and that's kind of like the food source of insulin, belly fat, rather. Yeah, so I think those are the big things with the diet.
Protein, toxins, healthy fats, your vegetables, fibers, and then being really mindful about the carbs, right? And it doesn't mean completely being free of them. We need carbs, by the way. So this is like really important to know. But are you getting, your full like whole carbohydrates and the non-starchy veggies, and then some starchy veggies too? Like I love butternut squash, but again, it's like at the end of a meal or as part of a meal that has all those components.
And also, I would segue to the next section, which is exercise, because the way I want to think of people should think about carbohydrates is, first of all, if going to someone who can really evaluate your metabolic health, So if you are pre-diabetic, diabetic, then you're going to want to really be limiting or eliminating those starchy carbs. But on the other hand, if you're metabolically healthy, if you have a good amount of muscle, which is really considered the sink of where we can put glucose after any meal in the form of glycogen. So if you exercise, have muscle, metabolically healthy, then yeah, you can probably tolerate a decent amount of carbs here and there. So I think that is something to consider when we are adding those foods, which if you're interested, we can now talk about my next favorite love, which is exercise.
Yes, let's go right in.
So specifically focusing on belly fat. Okay, there's two main things you need to do, but number one, let's just look at cardiovascular exercise. So there is a form of training, which I think a lot of people have heard at this point, and it really has a lot of different definitions, and that is high intensity interval training. And I always tell people, of course, listen to your body. But the idea is that we really want to be pushing ourselves where we're exerting a little bit of effort, where it's besides the number of like what your I want to say your heart rate is. I want to say you should really be thinking about your perceived exertion.
Mm-hmm.
And this is when it is hard, this is a signal to your body, specifically to something called your mitochondria, which are where we utilize oxygen to, we need more resources. We need more peeps. So you will produce more mitochondria. And guess what happens in mitochondria? Are you ready? This is where we burn fat, people. We burn fat in the mitochondria. So although exercise doesn't directly help with weight loss, it helps indirectly. And to bring this back full circle to our conversation at the beginning with belly fat, muscle is also an endocrine organ. Are you kidding? And it forms something called myokines. And these myokines are the good guys. And they communicate with every cell in your body to form more muscle. So what I always like to put a picture up, if you want to imagine like Olympic athletes for a moment, and you think about the long distance runner who I have to say looks a little bit sickly, and they can actually be the skinny fat, meaning they're thin on the outside, but they could have visceral fat. And then we got the sprinter, the guy who's jumping over the whatever you call it. But
Yeah.
the point is, I mean, they are, and they're not just doing weights up here, but they are muscly. And I am sorry, that is what we want to eradicate belly fat. And so to me, bang for the buck would be doing this, and it can be done any way, various ways. The whole idea is not going slow and steady, getting out of the comfort zone. It can be 30 seconds, it can be a few minutes. There's sprint training. This is a whole nother discussion on how to do it, but you kind of get the idea. And then, of course, you know, and I've been doing this for 40 years, and that is doing weight resistance. And so do not be afraid. You're not never going to look like a bodybuilder. And actually the irony is that heavier weights, that is not what makes you bulky. It's actually doing those leg lifts that I used to do in 1985. It's the repetition, it's the volume of exercise that can actually build more muscle, whereas you're building stronger muscle lifting heavier weights. But just engaging in the exercise itself is going to release those beneficial hormones, obviously, you know, pushing glucose into the cells and all of that. And then of course there's what you burn 24 hours after. So
Which I think we've mentioned, but it's this notion that yes, the more muscle you have, the more calories you burn at rest. And I think
yes,
especially in peri and menopause, building muscle is so important because we start losing muscle at an
right.
accelerated rate. And that muscle is going to be important for bone health, you know, for support and for our cognition. And there's so many studies now showing that like muscle really is where it's at as far as longevity. And obviously there's other things like community and things we haven't talked about, like that are more about our mental state and our sense of connection and purpose that
Well,
also play a role. But
the
the
one thing I
muscle,
would mention,
yeah, it's huge.
uh, the final thing I would mention, because yes, there are many other things we could discuss, but this is really critical, is, and I put it in one category, is stress and sleeping, because actually, you know where you build muscle? And I love telling kids this. Do you know what the number one sports nutrition supplement is? Do you know what it is? Sleep,
But
people. Sleep. You don't build muscle in the gym. That's when you're breaking it down, people. I love that. But anyways, so and so actually, if you are mentally stressed, and they do go hand in hand with sleep, and sleep, the response is actually similar, and that you can actually be, yes, unfortunately, losing muscle, building fat. So this is really foundational also, although we didn't have so much time to talk about those things, but I would just mention that they are foundational also. So this is where we're exhaling fat during our sleep and building muscle.
and I know you talked about the, heavy weights, which I completely agree with. And I also want to say that for somebody who's just starting, start easy. Start with low weights, or for people that have injuries, like even a 3-pound weight and doing some repetitions is going to help go in that
Of course,
direction.
yeah,
And over time,
absolutely.
we can start
Yeah,
increasing. We're not just going to go straight to like, a huge deadlift, but it is important to know that you
absolutely.
can
Because
always
I
grow from there. Go ahead.
I always like to say, number one, don't get injured, because obviously being out of the game is not going to be good at all. So yes, I mean, when I as a trainer, I would work with people on the lowest weights for an entire month until their brain connected with the movement to do it properly, and then we would do it slowly over time. So yes, and there's many ways to do this safely and slowly, and instructions and all of that. So yes, but good that you mention it. No one get hurt on my account.
Bonnie, this has been so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience over all these years. And I love that you have the background with the personal training, because I feel like that's definitely, you have the approach coming both from the exercise angle and from the nutrition. And I do think a lot of people, and a lot of people I have worked with certainly, that felt like, oh, I work out a lot, therefore I always thought I could eat everything. And now I'm having gut pain and I'm having digestive issues. And wow, never thought I would have needed that because I was doing the exercise. And I think you made it really clear that, yeah, exercise alone is not going to resolve all the issues, right, that come up. So this is amazing. I would love for you to share with everybody how people can find you. So your website, your podcast, and what can they download to learn more about what you do, and how to get benefits from it.
Okay, well, okay, this is my book, but it's londonwellness.net is my
Bring
website.
it back a little bit, I think,
Oh,
toward you maybe.
okay,
Let's
there you
see.
go.
Yeah,
Sorry.
there you go.
Oh,
Got
So,
it. Healthy rebels.
but also, I do want to share with your audience, because I spent a bit of time working on it, is the dining out cheat guide, a cheat sheet, if it were, because this is hard, and I don't want people to stop going out. That would really, I would feel sad, because it's so important to be socially. And anyway, so there is a link for a handout to really help you navigate when you do go out. So that would be it. And then yes, my it's a YouTube station / podcast, and it's Healthy Rebels by Bonni London.
Thank you again. It's such a pleasure to spend some time with you.
Okay, thank you. You too.